In this scene, I'll look at placing lights in my train station. I've opened up 14 station placing lights start.max. As you can see, I've finished out the floor, assigning materials and mapping to the different pieces to get some unique design going. And I've assigned materials here to the ticket booth, as well as to the can lights and any other pieces that I had left. Now I'll get some lights in. To start, I'll press T for top view and F3 for wireframe, and Z to zoom extents. On the command panel, I'll choose Create and Lights. I'll make a free light. I'm going to get the chandeliers in first. Typically what I want to do when I'm lighting is light from the biggest source first, and then let the light bounce around and see how it behaves, adding in additional lights if I need. I'll make a free light, and when Max says, "Would you like to add in the mental ray photographic exposure control?" I'll say yes. When we see MR in 3ds Max, that stands for mental ray, which is a rendering engine we're going to use, and it's very good for reflections and bounced light. Now I'll zoom in and place my light. I'll put it roughly on a chandelier, and hit Z to zoom extents. I'll right-click to stop creating lights, and zoom in if I need. I'm going to use my Align tool to place this light. With the light selected, I'll click on the Align tool, and click on the chandelier. I'll align this on the X, Y, and Z, center to center, and click OK. Since the light doesn't have any volume, center works nicely. Pivot would work just the same, and it might just orient differently on the chandelier. I'll take this light and pull it down into the body of the chandelier. Although in reality there are probably multiple bulbs here, I can get away with one light because it will emit out nicely in all directions. I'll name this light, so when I go listing my lights I can tell what's in what fixture. I'll call this chandelier light. With my light named, I'm ready to clone it. I'm going to clone the lights for the chandeliers as instances. Assuming that this place is clean and in good repair, all the lights in the chandeliers should behave equally, and so I can clone them as instances. Here's how I'll clone this. I'll press spacebar for selection lock and use the same technique I did to place the chandeliers. Clicking on the red X-axis, pressing S for snap, and registering my snap on some of the geometry out of the way. I'll clone over on the X-axis to the next chandelier, and clone this light as an instance. I'll repeat this all the way across, and then clone the whole row of lights up. Again, spacebar, register, hold shift, and drag. Now I'll pick both of these lights and do the same. If you'd like, you can switch around how you select things. If you noticed here when I drag the window it grabbed the chandelier. I have up here a filter, and the selection filter lets me change what I'm seeing and what I'm selecting. Right now everything is selectable, but I'll drop it down and pick lights, and now I can window around everything and only catch those lights. I'll press my spacebar for selection lock and register that snap, hold shift and clone over, and repeat it once more just to finish out this array. Now I'll take all the lights and clone them to the next chandeliers. The idea in lighting, while I'm doing this, is that we want to get our lights placed first. Like fixtures should have like light. Notice the offset snap there where the rubber band shows me going across the ceiling. When I light then, I want to get all the lights in place so that there's no dark areas caused by a missing light. Then once I've got all the lights in, I can start to balance the lighting and look at how the scene should be. Now I'll get in something for my sun. I'm not actually going to use the sun, which is in the daylight system we'll cover in other videos. I'm going to fake it with a directional light. Under the Create tab, under Lights, instead of Photometric, I'll choose Standard. And there I have some other lights. Spots, direct lights, omnis, skylights, and mental ray area omnis and spots. I'm going to use a direct light, and what the direct light was originally made for is the sun. When I put it in, it gives me an arrow in my scene, saying it's facing down that way. In this light then, I'll go into top view and rotate it, pressing E for rotate, and rotating it down and then over, making sure it's not rotated on a 45 in any direction. When you put in sun, you want to get it diagonally in the scene, making sure that it streams through the windows and across the walls and floors as well as possible, getting the maximum impact out of those sunbeams. Now I'll take this light and make it bigger, clicking on the modifier panel, and it's a directional light, and I'll go down under the directional parameters. These differ from our photometrics, which we'll adjust in the next videos, in that these are arbitrary. We determine how they look, and they're actually older than the photometrics. It was a recent switch to go to the photometric lights as the default, but the standards are still useful. Now what I'll do is check overshoot, which makes this light essentially infinitely big. Alternately, if you don't want to check overshoot, you can take the hotspot and simply crank it up wide enough to encompass the entire scene. The hotspot on a light is the area inside the light at 100% intensity. The fall-off then is where that light fades off to 0. The difference between the two produces a soft edge, a penumbra. Depending on how we'd like to have this light behave, we can link them very close or let them spread out. In this case, because it's the sun, I'm going to let it be outside and simply not care how big it is, as long as it's big enough to catch the scene. Now I'll get my spotlights in. I've got spotlights here in the tunnel entries, and they'll be a nice accent point. I'll click on Create and go back to my photometric lights and choose Free Light. Really, you can work with Target or Free. It just depends on your personal preference and how you'd like to manipulate it. I'll zoom in and place a light in one of these can lights I can see here. I'll change this light in the modifier panel from uniform spherical over to a spotlight, so I get a cone of light. And I'll use the same Align tool to get it centered. Now, if you notice, my Align tool doesn't respond to the can light, and that's because my selection filter is still on lights. I'll switch back to all and align it onto that can light, center and center, and click OK. I'll go in a left view and press Z to zoom extents and pull it down. One of the big things with lights is actually to make sure that the lights are probably below the fixture. The chandeliers I'm going to make not cast shadows, but things like this can light, what I'll typically do is make sure that this is slightly below. We really can't tell the difference between here and here, but that'll solve a lot of problems. I'll name this light and clone it in the same way to the other fixtures. I'm going to use the same clone technique, picking the light, pressing spacebar for selection lock, clicking on the red x-axis and making sure my snap is on, and cloning. Here's one, and the second one. Then I'll take the whole bank and clone it over. I'll hold Control, pick the other lights, and press spacebar for selection lock. I'll zoom out, register my snap, hold Shift, and clone. These are all instanced. That way, like lights have like intensity. Now I'm ready to get in and play with the color and intensity of the lights, making sure that the room has the right light balance from the chandeliers, the spotlights, and the sun streaming in through the windows in the late afternoon.